Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim, and our guest today is Deena Keller. So Deena, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Deena Keller. I'm based in Pacifica, California, so just south of San Francisco. And I am the founder and principal of Deena Keller Design, which is a creative studio that specializes in visual identities, sustainable packaging design, and creative strategy.
Awesome. So I'm just curious more about your background. Like, how did you get into this space in the first place?
That's a good question. So I went to school for design. I went to Syracuse. I went to and studied communication design. And going into school, I had no idea what that was. I kind of discovered it when I was there, but I really loved it. And just like it kind of added a lot of like design thinking and creative strategy to design, not just making design things look nice to look nice, but really like incorporating the idea of like business and like strategy and problem solving to the design that you're creating. And so, yeah, right out of school, I got a job in the same fields, working at a design firm, and got to work right away, like working on really big brands and working in creating physical products, which I didn't really focus on that so much in school, but I got to like create and like kind of understand how products got to shelf and like work with some mass retailers on making some of their private label, not only the packaging, but the product too, like so product development and working with supply chains and presenting to retailers. And so that kind of exposed me to this whole world of like consumer products and just made me like appreciate them and what like goes into making them. But then also like this light bulb going off of like designers can like design these things and like have impact on what gets to shelf and what lives in people's homes is like awesome. And I do remember the first product I made was this, it was so ugly, but it was butterfly like tumbler for a like tween like bathroom like set, which was like, it was so not my aesthetic, but it was like the first thing that like I physically, like I put it on a paper or like, you know, in a computer and designed it. And then it came and like it physically showed up. And I was like, wow, you know, I just was so like impressed with that, like that it could become something, my designs could be something tangible and like mass produced. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And then all my jobs and like, you know, back, you know, all my steps since then have been kind of still touching consumer products in some capacity.
Yeah, so I'm curious about if you can share more about what you do today. And like also just essentially kind of how your clients work with you. So does somebody essentially come to you and say, hey, listen, I have this idea for a product, can you help me make the product and design it? Or is it more so like on the packaging side or a combination of both? Like, what does that process look like when you do end up working with?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, primarily a lot of my clients are consumer products. So CPG brands that are like either lifestyle or mission-based brands, mostly in the health and wellness space and a little bit of beauty. So a lot of times they'll come to me and it's kind of a lot of different stages. So some could be super startup, they're super scrappy, and they might have an idea, but they don't even have a product yet, or they don't have a brand name, or they don't have investment, all sorts of things. So I can help them like very early on. So super small. It might just be a founder. It might just be a founder and like one other person, or it could be a team of like 3 or 4 people. And I'm just kind of coming in with the kind of creative, helping them build that vision. And so some of it could be really on where you're creating like investment decks that are just helping paint the picture of like, what's the vision? Like, where could this go? What could it look like? And so, you know, that's kind of like selling, it's like this painting the vision and then always continuing that relationship with them and kind of continuing until we actually make something real. And then it could be also like some brands come to me where they have something established, but they're creating a new line, or they're kind of like shifting into a new category and they're not really sure how they're going to show up in that specific category. You know, maybe their bread and butter is like toothpaste or something, and they want to shift into like deodorant, and they're like, do we even have the like right to play in that category? And if we do, what do we need to like shift, and what things do we need to hold on to as a brand to kind of make that jump successfully? And then, some companies come to me with, like they have an established brand, but they want to like create a whole new brand in a whole new category, and they don't even want any sort of connection. They don't even want to know that they're connected. So it's like, okay, well then what does that even look like? And kind of coming up with like that look, that feel, that brand name. And I kind of help with stuff small and big. So it could be just like an extension of a packaging line, like a product they already have, and they want to like just add, maybe it's hair care, and they just want to add another new couple SKUs that focus on like volumizing or something like that. So I kind of help. What does that extension look like once you get into like more established, like they have multiple product lines? It's like, how do you kind of keep the integrity of your brand look and feel, but kind of extend it and still have space to like extend into like different SKUs and different offerings. So that's primarily what else do they come? And so, I have actually had more recently some that have just come for like an advisory role. So just being like, this is what our line looks like. Can you give us some advice, just even from a like color strategy perspective? Because that's like so important, especially in retail spaces, of like looking at the whole shelf set and like, how do you stand out within your competitive set?
Yeah, I'm curious about that process as well, because like super fascinating. And I think a lot of our audience and people might have an idea for a product, might already, have a product, but how do you figure those things out? Because there's so many different color schemes and designs and possibilities. And I think so many founders might be overthinking, or they might not think about that process enough in terms of what the colors they should use, what that should be like. Because to your point, standing out on a shelf is super important for a new brand, and you want people to see your product and to pick it up. And so like, what does that process kind of look like for you to help your clients stand out on the shelf and actually sell through in retail? Because as you said, it is super important. And if you don't sell through, then you might be out of the store.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is like doing your homework, look at, who are the retailers' spaces. Each one is different, and each of them have different parameters. Each of them have different like sizes of those sets, and so your shelf space might be different based on which retailer. And then I would also like just look at each one, and also they have different strategies, right? And they're selling to different consumers. So you kind of also need to know what is important at that, point of decision making at shelf for each of those customers in those different places. But really having a conversation with your client of who is your like most important retailer, like where's the volume? And obviously you want to be diversified, but you probably have a couple that are really key. And so really, really like analyzing their shelf space, really knowing like who the big competitors are, who are you taking space? And then really looking, so from a color perspective is like, if you already have an established brand, you're kind of working with what you have and what's been working, but you can like see where you can make shifts to make things pop. And then really like, if it's a certain category, which is a sea of green, or like it's a predominantly one color, like white or something like that, you're like, okay, like let's not be white because all that white blends together. And when you have like 3 seconds for a consumer to make a decision, if you're the purple when everybody else is white, they're gonna like, they literally go there being like, I need the purple one. Like that, it's like, that's kind of like how pared down and how quick the decision making is. So you need that really memorable thing. And so it's really starting there. And if you already have a brand color, there's still things you can do with the accent colors to help you pop, or the different finishes or effects that play in the lighting of the shelf space to, again, make your product pop off a shelf. And I mean, because usually you're still shopping by like a fragrance or a color or like a scent. And so kind of also like making sure those things are come to life at shelf.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of rebrands, right? 'Cause I think it's also something that could be possible. And I think, where we sit, we work a lot in the direct-to-consumer space, and there could be people who might have a strong D2C presence and they want to get into retail. obviously it's a whole different strategy. Maybe the packaging was not like something that they thought about as much because they weren't going to be on shelves in the first couple of years. And now they're like, okay, we want to get into retail. In that situation, would it be something where they could potentially rebrand without, and change the color scheme without really impacting their business? Or would you recommend, even if the colors are not what they could be or what the most optimal colors are, that they should still kind of stick with their same colors?
Yeah, I would say going into retail, if you're a D2C company first, and then you're going into retail, like you said, it is a different, and you have to be retail ready for it to be successful. You can kind of go into retail with your D2C products, but it's really a short-term game, and it's like not going to be like long lasting, and the product probably won't like be successful long term. So you really have to take that opportunity to make your product retail ready. And there's just different things that, even from a regulatory perspective, that has to be on your product that you might get away with not having on your product when you're D2C. And so making all those adjustments, and if you're already going to be touching the product and the art to make those adjustments, you might as well invest in making, there's like changes, like, there's degrees of changes you can make. And so you can kind of like straddle that line of like still visually being connected and having continuity of what your product looks like online, like what people are now familiar with, but also kind of creating some distinction or pushing it harder to work harder for you in the retail space. But I would take it as an opportunity to, you could, really push, like, because if you think about D2C, people are coming to the site and they're experiencing the brand there, but they're not, their first point of decision making isn't the packaging. Whereas it flips when you go to retail, packaging is doing all the work for you. So I think people will give you some leeway if what they order online comes and it looks differently and it comes in a retail ready package now. They're fine because they've already made the decision point. I think you want to really make sure at retail your packaging is working as hard as you can and really fix that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I think that's a good point because exactly, it's like in D2C, it's about the site, it's about the landing page, it's about handling all the objections and showing all the value there. And to your point, that when you're in retail, it's kind of taking that information from your site and as much as you can, putting it on your packaging. And I guess from that note as well, like how do you kind of put that on your packaging? Right? Because if you have a certain health products, right, and you want to say, okay, we have no this, no that, we have this. How do you kind of like add this to your packaging and make it stand out without being like too like cluttered, you could say? Because obviously like your packaging and especially like on a shelf, and I say, okay, it might be, it has to be like, this size. And how do you kind of balance that out with like making sure, hey, like I might want to talk about these features, which are super important, but I also don't want it to be like too cluttered on my packaging.
Yeah, it's hard, but I would say it's editing. And so it's really about the front of pack has to work the hardest for you, but you're really just getting people. The goal of it is to just get someone to pick it up, right? And so you really simplify and clarify that message on the front of pack to like the bare essence of like what that product is, what it does, like, and those key attributes that are like really important for that product in someone's life and how it's adding value. And then on the back of pack, so when you get someone to pick it up, you have more space to go a little bit deeper. Of course, you don't want to be cluttered, but you have to bring home a couple of those key attributes, if it's from a like sustainability or transparency or clean ingredient story, or if it's about the brand itself, if it's like a really compelling founder story. Again, it's like you have to really pare it down to keep it to like a couple sentences or, a couple bullet points, but still you can have a nod there to go at least that layer deeper. And then I think there's a lot of stuff at retail now that you have avenues for people to dig deeper if they want. You can use QR codes either on pack or there's, support copy or signage that you can kind of, if they really want to go. But like, again, thinking about who's like what mindset they're in and when they're there buying something, they're not going to, how often are people going to stand there and really read? They're going to try it. Like, it's really about trial of like, I'm going to take this, I'm going to take it home, I'm going to try it. And then the goal is that hopefully that experience, you win them over in the actual in-home, like in-use experience that they come back.
Yeah, and in terms of packaging design, right, because like as you said, right, there's different ways you can add a founder story, you can add product features, you might not be able to add both. So when it comes to like those things, do you see brands that are sometimes testing it where maybe like in one store they might have this, or is it more so that like you'll test it out in a batch for a few months? And like, how do you kind of know, or do you, is it possible to like iterate and test like you do online with like packaging, for example?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's based on volume. You have to have a minimum order quantity of what you're making, so you can't have a ton of like A/B testing out there, but you could for sure do that. I think more what's the reality is that brands put something out there and then they kind of see how it's resonating. And I think you also have all that data and insight once you put it out there, of how people are responding, not so much in retail, but, I mean, and how they're doing, how it's performing, but also from all their other data points from like social or, their site or email or whatever. And you kind of start to get even calls. I don't know, you can kind of start getting feedback on and stuff. And I don't think people are like going to respond and be like, this bullet point about the founder isn't really resonating with me. But I think as you learn more about your company and what people are responding to organically across all your touch points, then you can really start to understand what are the things that you really need to hit home on your packaging. And I think the thing with packaging, it is iterative. It's just a little bit of a different timeline. So I would love to say you put something out there and it does well, but like it's always like, oh, something has to be optimized or the formula has to be changed. So you're constantly kind of going in there and tweaking things. And when you do have the chance to again touch the artwork, or you're going to optimize some of the marketing copy or those like key attributes, again, just with learning across your whole company of like what people are responding to. Honestly, you get feedback from the retailers because they know the category really well, and so they can tell you, oh, this is like a trend, or this is really important, or we've gotten feedback, I know, like ingredients, just like certain key trendy ingredients are so important, so if you have them, put them on front of packs so that people, like, they're literally shopping by ingredients. So don't miss that opportunity.
That's awesome, and really good advice. And then I guess in terms of your business, right? Because obviously now we're just getting started here in Q2 of 2025. What are some of your biggest goals and objectives for the rest of the year?
Sure. Well, I think my biggest goals and objectives are to continue growing, continuing to get clients. I have, work right now. I think that's a little bit the exciting, but also nerve-wracking part of like being a consultancy is you're kind of always networking and always kind of like, where is your next work coming from? And so I have some clients that are going to be with me for the rest of the year, but it's like, where are those pockets where I have capacity of like having conversations now that I can like line up work for at the end of the year. I mean, I think that's one of my learnings is like, a lot of times you'll have people or clients that are excited to work with you, but then, just with any business, then there's a pivot or there's a change in timing. And so you might have the clients, but you just have to really work with them on, I feel like the schedule and the timing of when the work actually hits is a lot of times very fluid because you kind of are responding to things that are happening internally or in the market that kind of shifts when their work is going to actually hit. And so it's just kind of always being adaptable to that and trying to plan other work to kind of fill in those gaps.
Makes sense. And then if you could go back in time to before you got started in the business, what would you say is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew?
The biggest piece of advice I would have would be networking. So like, I think I took it at like maybe face value. I was like, oh yeah, that's important, but didn't really realize how really valuable that is and how much you have to continually build that muscle. Like it's something that doesn't really get turned off. And so especially this year is like what I've really learned. And I think before maybe it was just me growing as a person, and as a business owner. But like, I think before I kind of was like, oh, it's kind of maybe something I wasn't looking forward to doing. And now I realize I was like, no, I actually love it because you get to learn what are people up to? What are they looking about? What are they problem solving? What is keeping them up at night? And it's really like so rewarding just to hear other people's stories or where they're at and like how you can help because they're really this utilizing them too as like a whole library of knowledge, and their knowledge is different than yours. So like always looking at it as a win-win. And I think it's almost changing my mindset a little bit of like how to think about it has been really valuable.
Awesome. Well, yeah, that's really good advice. So if somebody watching this wanted to reach out to you or wanted to work with you, do you mind sharing your website, social media, I guess best ways to get?
Yeah, I would just go to my website. It's DeenaKeller.com, and there's a way to reach out to me on there. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I think my end is like Deena L. Keller, but yeah, I'm easy to find on there.
Deena, thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.